live here, and then so we are live now, so this will be good.
All right.
Yes, we are live, and I am here. This is going to be really, really cool. Hopefully, other other people will get questions in because the thing is, Jeff, when you and I get together, is there's no shortage of like stories and discussions, and then the time whistles by and all of
Yep.
that happens. But so this is Jeff Smith, was the editor of Hot Rod Magazine, and there are so many things that we can talk about. But for today, we're going to try to stay focused on this is the famous Callaway Sledgehammer Corvette.
Yep.
And for our needs here today, what I'd like you to talk about is because I know that you are good friends with him, and I have I always say nothing but the very best things
Oh,
about John Lingfelter. So
yep.
what I want to do is if we could talk a little bit about like some of the cool things that happened with this car, and like we were talking about one of the things that they had to fix here to go fast. So let's like talk me through this experience that you had with doing the story on this Corvette.
Yeah. Well, let me set the stage by saying that when I was at Carcraft before I went to Hot Rod, I got together with John to do a story, and he decided to start building street motors. And I did the story in Carcraft, and he told me later he never had more money in the bank than he did after I did my story, because all these people sent in deposits for 383s and 468 big block Chevys.
Okay,
And
great.
so after that, then anything I wanted to do, or he would just call me and say, "This is what I'm doing." So that's how this started. Was Callaway got in touch with John and wanted him to build the engine for this Sledgehammer car.
Okay,
And
before you go on, I just want to reiterate that thing that you just said about the effect of the magazine happening. Like if somebody does a story on something,
yeah,
I did a story with the guys from HP Performance, and we did a story that turned out to be in Hot Rod Magazine, and they said, "Oh my God." When that story came out, I quit my job the next day, and we started doing turbo kits because we got so many orders.
yeah,
So yeah,
yeah.
continue
But
on. But it made a huge change in what was going on in their lives.
yeah, yeah, and when you work at the magazine after a while, you just kind of look at it like a job, but you don't really sometimes really understand
Yeah,
how much of an impact you have on the industry. So and you do, but you don't, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's a job. But then something like that, like the Lingenfelter story, and that was a deal where I didn't know about it until much later. And it
yeah.
was actually Rick Vogelin who told me that John told him, but he never told me. And I called him up and I go, "You never told me you made all this, that you had, it was such a huge response." He goes, "Well, I thought I told you." he was
Yeah.
he was a funny guy, but just one of the sharpest guys I've ever met. He and John Causey,
Yeah.
are my heroes.
Yeah.
And so,
And
so
the nicest guys. I mean,
oh,
Lingenfelter came up to me
absolutely.
at the top of Speed Shootout, was asking me about the Vortec, and I'm like, "You're John Lingenfelter.
Yeah.
Why would you be asking me anything?"
Yep. I remember one time I came there to do a story in Decatur, and it was a Sunday afternoon, and his house was right next to the shop. So I knew that he was probably in the shop. I walked in the front door, and he's in the engine building room, and he's working on his A dragster motor, and he starts asking me questions, and I'm like, "Dude, you're John Lingenfelter. What are you asking me for?" And he goes, "I'm just looking for opinions,
Yeah.
and input." And it was literally compression versus valve clearances, and it was like, I don't know. I don't think I'd ever want to give up compression. And he says, well, that's kind of what I think. So he was just open, and
Yeah.
and I think that's why he was so creative, because he was so open
So
to just
after
input
that
from anywhere.
deal, Callaway contacted him to like do something with these crazy Corvettes.
Yeah. And so and I'm not sure exactly. I didn't go. I was going to look this up and I forgot to see when this happened, but this was before John went to Bonneville with the twin turbocharged car. I think this was before that. So this was
Okay.
probably his first experience with probably not his first experience with turbos, but I mean an aggressive experience like that. And I think in the story, if I remember, that they built two engines. One was the development engine, and then the second one he sent to them, and they put it in the car.
Okay.
And they took camshaft out of it from its initial deal, and the EGTs came down, and the power came down a little bit, but it became much more tractable. And then they drove it from Old Lyme, Connecticut to Transportation Research Center in Ohio, and got like got like, I don't know, 18 or 19 miles a gallon with it, you know? And that really wasn't the focus. It wasn't trying to get efficiency out of it. It
Yeah.
was just, they just wanted
But
to
and
show that it
you
was
were
a real
saying that
street
they
car.
had, when they were testing it, they had an excess amount of power, but when they ran it actually for the top speed thing, they had detuned it, right?
They tuned it down to about 880, you know, which
Okay.
was, and then there, you know, I mean, Carroll Smith was involved with this project. And Tom Goad was the chief engineer for it. And I think he was a son of a GM engineer. So pretty
Okay.
sharp guys.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, and a lot of work went into the aerodynamics of it for obvious reasons. And then,
Was
and
this
then,
car
and of
in
course,
the,
John's power.
did that car go in the wind tunnel?
I don't know. I don't
Okay.
think so, but I think they probably had lots of input from GM, you know, because with Tom Goad's father being at GM at the time, I think he probably had insights into, you know, what to do to tune this thing up a little bit, you know.
Sure.
Yeah. And then
And this
you know,
was
a lot of
this was a fuel injected motor, obviously, and not a carbureted motor. And
right.
I had a conversation with people on our live, because we've talked about this before. I ran a single turbo on a tune port motor with the tune port assembly on it and everything, and it made like a ton of torque and not very much horsepower, because that's what they do NA.
Right.
But they were insisting that this car ran a factory tune port, and I'm like, it didn't. I said it may have had a box on it with that kind of throttle body, but it had some sort of tunnel rammy kind of, you know, short runner manifold on it.
Yeah, it's more of a front breather tunnel ram system, and then it was a Zytec computer, I think. So it wasn't a factory ECU.
Yeah.
You know, that allowed them, you know, access. But this was long before, well, right about the same time that John Meany was getting started with his own fuel injection system. You know, that predated digital fuel injection, but that was essentially how it started. And that was a story. And I met Meany through John Lingfelter. John called him up, and so he said, "Come out. I want you to see this deal." That's a whole nother story.
Now, you're in the photos that you sent me, you're showing Pontiac aluminum heads. Is that what they used on this motor?
Yeah, it was a Pontiac Motorsports head. Okay. You know, John Callies was the head of Pontiac Performance and the racing end of the Pontiac division at that time, and that was really a really good cylinder head. I think it was still a 23-degree head, but at the time it was the, you know, if not the best, one of the best, you know, racing heads, because it was originally designed for NASCAR.
Okay.
Yeah, and so they just bolted that thing on because they knew that would move more air.
And then what size was this motor that they ran in the Sledgehammer car?
You know, that's a good question. I don't know. My guess is
I want to say it was a 383 or a 388 or something, but I don't remember.
Yeah, I think it was a 383, but I'd have to go through the story and read it, and you know.
You wrote it. You should.
No, it wasn't like 480 inches or anything like that. Yeah. It was. If it was 383, it wasn't, or 388, it wasn't any bigger than that, because nobody really was. Very, very few people were building big cubic inch small blocks back then. Gotta remember, this is 1988. Yeah, you know, because later John built me a 4 and 20 inch small block that was based off a bow tie block, and that was pretty exotic stuff back in the day. That was 19.
That was in your. Did you have that in your Chevel?
That was in my Chevel when I took it to the Pony Express race and ran 165. Yeah, went 165 miles an hour, 65 Chevel, which I don't recommend you do, because the car tried to fly several times. Several times it tried to fly. Yeah.
When they designed that, they weren't thinking about that top speed thing.
No, 65 miles an hour was fast for that car.
Yeah, that would be better. I'm looking at one of the photos of the turbos, and the thing that's interesting about those turbos that they're showing, at least in the photo, is that on the exhaust housing, the wastegate is it's an external wastegate. Like, it's not an internal wastegate, it's an external one, but the external wastegate is actually mounted on the exhaust housing. Which is kind of cool looking. I mean, it's kind of unique.
And that may have been purposely for packaging, because imagine twin turbos on this thing, you know, because one of Tom Goad's comments was this whole car was a rolling heat exchanger. I think there was something like 9 or 11 heat exchangers on the car, because it had functioning air conditioning too.
And so did it have air-to-air intercoolers on the front of it?
I believe so. Yeah.
I think that's what they're showing here on this.
There's one of the photos in there that shows them
yeah,
plumbed into the front of the car. So, yeah. And then that previous photo that you just showed of the front tire assembly, that gill behind the front tires is where
it had twin air-to-airs. It looks like behind the radiators, although I don't know where the radiators were. That's interesting.
Yeah. Well, I'm pretty sure they were probably just air-to-air, because air-to-liquid back then was pretty exotic stuff. That was probably GTP stuff back then.
Yeah, and like we were talking about, they didn't have to, Lingfelter knew how to build NA power, so they didn't have to run a ton of boost on these things to make like, a pretty efficient amount of power.
Oh yeah, they in the story, because I don't remember it, but I had to look it back up. They were running 15 pounds of boost.
Yeah,
which is one atmosphere.
That's what we were talking about. That seems to be right in the reasonable range.
Yeah, and so I mean, they probably generated quite a bit of cooling out of that. But 15 pounds of boost with a turbo, your inlet air temperatures wouldn't be that high anyway.
Yeah, if you're grabbing cold air. And what was the day like when they were running this at TRC?
I remember that John told me that it was a light mist. It was overcast, so it wasn't hot. It wasn't a very hot day. Okay. Probably really fairly high humidity, but probably maybe high 60s, low 70s. So
but mist is not what you would want on a track when you're trying to go 250
miles
an hour.
It wasn't. And I looked up on Callaway's website, and there was a whole long story about how this car was built and all the things they did and all the engineering that went into it. And that it's no longer on their website. They just kind of casually mentioned it because I didn't know this. Reeves Callaway passed away like a year and a half ago.
Oh, wow.
In 2023. He was born in 47. So that would put him in his like late 70s. So I was a little surprised by that. But anyway, he was there and was supposed to drive the car, but apparently was not feeling well. And so John offered to drive the car. Okay. So it was John driving the car. And that's in my story. That the story that was on the Callaway website, as I recall, it didn't really specifically say that John drove the car, but he most definitely did.
Yeah, we won't get into it, but didn't you say that there was some possible bad blood or animosity or whatever between those two guys?
Let's just put it this way, that John did not get all the credit that he deserves for a lot of things that in that era, that time frame, he did not get all the credit for all the things he did. Yeah. So not to take anything away from Callaway Engineering, because looking at their website today, it's like that's pretty impressive stuff. But it just didn't work out. So
John's definitely the guy that you want behind the wheel too, because he's not going to lift.
Oh boy, yeah. John was, any time that we would do stuff, we would take a car to the track or anything like that, he could always go faster than me. I mean, it was amazing. So I think I might told that story before, but later we took a normally aspirated Corvette to TRC that John had built. We did a story on it. It was kind of a triple threat car. So it went mid 12s and got over 25 miles a gallon. And then we took it to TRC and went 100. He went 184 miles an hour in a normally aspirated. I think it was a 383 Corvette as well, an 86 Corvette. And then he came in, went 184, and basically handed me the helmet and said, "Here, you go drive it." And I said, "I've never been this fast before." And he goes, "Just keep it going straight. It'll be fine." And I came off the corner and came down. He said, "Come off the corner, turn forward, and just stand on it." And I went by, and they timed me at 180 miles an hour. I was 4 miles an hour slower, and he was mad at me when I pulled in. He said, "Go back out there and go fast." And he said, "What'd you do?" And I said, "Well, the tail got light. The tail started to come around." He said, "Oh, you countersteered." I said, "Yeah. I mean, it was almost nothing." And he goes, "That cost you 4.5 miles an hour." Yeah. It's like, so he said, "Go back out there and do it again." "No, thanks. I'm done." Yeah. I went 180. That's the fastest I've ever been in my entire life. That's fine.
You were saying, didn't he tell you not to do that?
He said not to do that,
and it will self-center?
Yeah. He said it was essentially the sideboard of the car will present itself to the air, and then the air will push it back. Which just tells you how little downforce there was on the back end of the car.
Oh yeah.
And I shot a photo, which back then was all filmed, so it took me a week to get it processed. And when I saw the photo that I shot of him driving the car at 184, the back end was almost off the ground. I mean, there probably wasn't more than 50 pounds of downforce holding the tires on the ground.
Oh wow.
And that day was dry, but it was moving around because he had put some weight in the nose of the car to keep the air out from underneath the front, but we didn't think about maybe it being light in the back.
Maybe a little spoiler, maybe some weight or something in the back.
So a little bit of weight would have really helped. It probably would have been faster. But that's the stuff you learn after you're all done.
that tells you something about John right there as a driver, that he kept his foot planted and told himself, "Oh, it's gonna self-correct.
It'll correct. And I mean, once he said that, it's like, okay, it makes sense, And I think I might have even said that, and he just goes, "So go back out there." And I was like, "No, thanks."
No,
I'm not that much of a risk taker. There's not going to be hordes of people surrounding me and throwing champagne at me. No, that's fine. I went 180. That's good. That's okay. Yeah. He was mad at me.
Well, and I told you that when I went to the top speed shootout with my Mustang, that they were going around to all the people that were there, and they're all lying about how fast their cars will go.
Right.
And they asked John, he said, it's going to go 202. Yeah. And it went 202.3 or whatever, So it's not, he goes there knowing what it had, it's already done that. So he knows this isn't the first time that he's running it for top speed. So he knows what it does. He goes, you know what? I think I might be able to take some toe out of it or something, and I might be able to get like another half a mile an hour or a mile an hour. Right. I'm like, really? You're going to do something for a half a mile an hour?
Yeah, he was classic. Anytime I dealt with him, he would always under promise and over deliver.
Yeah,
that was how it was. So
he was so soft spoken and nice. I mean,
oh yeah, just he was a lot of fun, and going to dinner with him was an adventure.
Oh yeah.
So you're sitting at dinner with him and it's like he's part of the family, so you're eating and talking and kind of stuff, and I'm asking him questions, doing all this stuff. He just looks at the car and goes, he's got his fork in his hand, he's gonna eat that.
Yeah.
And steal food off my plate if I didn't eat it fast enough.
It was the highlight of my young career, my early career, to drive out there in my Mustang and to be sitting there just to be a fly on the wall, listening to his stories and Corky Bell and Bob Norwood and all of these guys that I had read about. And I got to sit there and just, I didn't want to like interject anything. I just wanted to sit there and listen.
Absorb it.
Yeah, to listen to all of these things and go, oh my God, this is so cool.
Yep. Yeah, he was a great guy.
So talk us through, because I remember from the story, because I read obviously all of your stuff, and this was famous in all of the magazines, even all the wine and cheese magazines and stuff. But so tell us a little bit about what happened with their like air inlets and stuff. So what was going on with that?
So they went out, and this is in the story, but they went out and came back in at about 220, and one of the guys that was running the timers for the Transportation Research Center, TRC, comes over and says, "Man, you guys went 220 mile an hour." And Tom Goad was disappointed. He goes, "Well, it should be faster." And he goes, "Well, how fast you guys want to go?" And he goes, "I think it'll go 250." And the guy turned around and walked away like, "Yeah, right. That's not going to happen."
Yeah.
And so there, and like I said, it had been raining or light misting. And I don't remember now, and it's not in the story, who noticed it. I don't know if it was John or Tom Goad or maybe one of the guys that was working on the car. But with the wetness that was there, the dampness, you could see dirt tracks coming out of the gills on the side of the car, because the turbos were breathing through gills that were located right behind the front tires.
Yeah.
So
we'll show the gill. There we go.
Right there. So that was the air inlet. Well, that's also a low pressure area right there. Yeah. And so someone noticed that it looked like there was dirt coming out of the gills. Yeah. I go, wait a minute, this thing's moving all kinds of air. There should not be anything coming out of it. It should all be going in. And so I don't know who constructed it. We'll give Tom Gold the credit for it, but they created some little trailing edge gills that are about maybe 2 inches, 2.5, 3 inches deep, and kind of a radius, and then just literally just racer taped it to the trailing edge of the gill, and then stuck John back in the car. The car went 254.
Was this on the back side of that gill opening or the front side?
So on the trailing edge, so before the door opening is where they put it.
Okay, yeah.
So at top to bottom is only maybe about probably 1.5 inches at the top, and then deeper in the middle, and then trailing back again. It was a scoop for all intents and purposes. Yeah. But they were trying to pull in pressurized air because you know what happens when the air hits the front of the car, it separates. You've got a boundary layer there.
Sure.
And that was, I think they realized that the air was separating and there was low pressure right there. And as soon as they got positive pressure into the turbos, then all of a sudden it just took off.
Then they get happy then. That was a nice 30 or 40 mile an hour modification.
Yeah, because there was a hole in the grill in the leading edge in front of the hood, but that was for the radiators. And it wasn't very big. But when you're going 250, you don't need a lot of air, opening up. And anything they were going to do was going to create drag. So that was the reason they downsized that part of it. So, and then there was gills on the trailing edge on the back wheel, and that was for all the other, the power steering cooler and air conditioning
oil coolers and stuff,
and all the other coolers. Yeah. So
now what transmission did this thing have in it?
You know what? That's a good question. It might have been a ZF. I'm not sure if that's it. Yeah, it would be in the story. I honestly don't remember.
Yeah, I don't remember either. I would think it would be a manual trans. It would make more sense that it was a manual trans.
Yeah. There's one photo that I don't know if I included or not, but there's a single disc clutch, a center force single disc.
Oh, that's
clutch.
right. Yeah, so it is a manual. Yeah.
So, yeah, torque peak was 770 foot-pounds of torque at 5250. Yeah, So, let's see, midway. Yes, it was a center force. It was really before they called it Center Force. It was still Midway Industries, and Bill Hayes was still alive, and he spec'd them out of clutch. And then, that's right, it's a Doug Nash 5-speed.
I was just gonna say it's probably a Nash back then, right?
It was a Doug Nash 5-speed, which is fifth gear is still 1-to-1 on those boxes. Then they put the 4+1 overdrive behind that because it had like a 308 gear in the back of it, I think. So they ran it through an overdrive, which later with Lingfelter's 300 mile an hour attempt, they didn't do that. They went because that costs you power when you go through an overdrive.
Sure.
It's another 2% or something like there was 3% loss. And you didn't want that loss. So John, I think John, they were doing a Pontiac Firebird with Carl Stagemeyer and Gary Akers. And John built the twin turbocharged motor for it. And he didn't want to go through an overdrive. So what they did was they spec'd off like a 220-to-1 12-bolt rear end gear set.
Okay.
And I didn't know that. Well, then later they sold it. It was we talked about that last night. Curly's car.
McDonald's car.
McDonald's car.
Yeah.
Sold it to Street Rod Company. I was going to look them up, then I forgot to do that too. I'm getting old, man. I'm forgetting things. But anyway, they went fast. And when I did the story on that car, and when I was the editor at Chevy High, I asked them. I said, "Where'd you get a 220 12-bolt gear set?" And they said, "I don't know. Some guy at Bonneville had some sets made for something else they were doing, and we found out about and bought a set." And then later I was talking to Lingfelter, and he goes, "Who do you think that was?" That was me. And I think the deal was to go to Richmond Gear. Their minimum purchase was 50 gear sets. So he bought 50 or 25, whatever it was.
Yeah.
Just so he could have that one gear set he needed for the car. So he wouldn't have to run through an overdrive.
That's super tall.
Yep. And then the Callaway car, they ran a 4+1 overdrive piece on the back side of the Nash 5-speed.
Okay. Yeah, because the Nash is the Nash 1-to-1. That doesn't really help you very much, but
Yeah.
You know, if you can get the overdrive in it, that's nice.
Right. Because the Nash 5-speed back then, in those days, well, still is the case today. It's a Richmond thought, but it was a 325 first gear, and then their concept was you bolt that transmission into a car, and you've got a really deep first gear, so you put a tall rear gear in it, and then fifth gear is kind of like overdrive, but it's 1-to-1.
Yeah,
and it
Rick
actually
from
works
Wastegate
really well.
has a Doug Nash 5-speed in that the Chevy that he has with the 427 big block on it, and he wanted it to be old school, and that was it.
Yep, yeah, it's a great transmission. Yeah, it's a
good
idea.
That's cool. I've got a picture up here of a Callaway twin turbo, the production car, it looks like, and then I'm thinking that's like a Gazelle, a Jet Ranger or something like that.
Yeah, it's a French-built Aerospatiale Gazelle helicopter. It was a military spec helicopter. That was Reeves' personal transportation. So when I flew into New York to do the story, he said, "I'll pick you up at the airport." He didn't tell me in what. And so he said, "When you get to the airport, call me." He says, "And then I'll come get you." And I'm thinking, he's going to drive from Connecticut. I'm going to be here for a couple hours. Well, he flew this helicopter down, and then picked me up at the airport, and then took me back to his shop, and would park the helicopter right in front of his shop. So we parked his personal car in front of it, so I could take a picture of that. That was pretty cool.
Yeah. Is that the only time that you've been picked up by a helicopter?
Yeah.
To be taken to
it was pretty crazy. And so, as journalists, we get spoiled, right? Because we get all the special,
but not that kind of spoiled
passes and everything. And it, totally spoiled me for going to the track and being a normal person,
Yeah. So after that, did you ask when people were talking to you, okay, so where's the helicopter landing to pick me up?
Well, I think he said, I called him and he said, okay, go to this. It was a private, a private area off of, I was LaGuardia. I don't know where it was. I don't remember now. But he said, just go there. And then when I land, I'll call them ahead and tell them to tell you where to be. And then I just walked out on the flight line and got back in the helicopter, and we took off.
Wow.
It's pretty crazy.
Just like you're somebody, huh?
Yeah, he liked to do that, though. He wanted to impress you because, Callaway, his father was the guy that created Callaway Golf Club. So there was some serious family money involved.
They've sold a few of those.
Yep.
Well, that's super cool. So, and you were saying, you were talking about going out there to do the story on that car, I think on the Sledgehammer car.
Yeah.
And when you arrived, what happened?
So I get there and takes me inside, shows me the car, and it's all ripped apart, and it's not running. And I go, dude, I told you I was coming, and we need action photos of this car. And so he goes, well, there was some project involved with this thing, and we had to take it apart, and it's sorry. So I said, well, I need action photos. He goes, okay, here's what we'll do. We'll get the shop truck, and we'll hook a rope to it, and we'll pull it in front of the road, in front of the shop, and then we'll let go of the rope, and then as the car goes by, I'll do a pan blur.
Wow.
So the car didn't run when I was there. Because people ask me later, did you go for a ride? And it's like, no, it wasn't running. Well, wait a minute. There's a photo of it going down the road. I said, we were pulling it with a truck.
Oh, yeah. That's some Carroll Shelby snake oil there, man.
Yep. And that kind of cheating happened a lot, So a lot of photography cheating to get things done where it's not really assembled, but it looks like it is, that
you gotta make it happen. There's a lot of cars like that, and guys have talked about that on social media. A lot of cars like that go to SEMA that barely roll in for their display. They're not really running working cars so much as they're
right.
It appears as though it's working.
Yep. Yeah, but it's what you got to do. I remember one time for Carcraft, we painted my orange Chevel, and it was white at the time, and we painted it orange. And I showed up at this paint booth at an adult body shop thing at night, where the guys come in and work on their cars.
Yeah.
Like a Votech school kind of thing. And I roll in with this thing, and it's in primer, and the instructor is going to shoot it for me. He's a friend of mine, And they all start looking at the car, and they all look at me and go, you're not really going to paint this, are you? I go, oh yeah, I mean, we got to paint it. He goes, they looked aghast, right? It's like, it's not ready. I said, oh, I know it's not. I had like 2 hours last night to block sand it. So what can you do in 2 hours?
Yeah.
So
that's totally prepped, right?
so that's totally prepped. So and they were just aghast, right? And they all walked away because like, well, we don't.
Oh, yeah.
I said, well, you got magazine deadline. This has to be painted by tomorrow so we can shoot the cover. The paint's still going to be wet when we shoot the cover. Oh, and so then later I was at a shop, and it was up on the hoist, and this guy comes in. It was a friend of mine's shop, and we were doing some exhaust work. And this guy walks up, and he didn't know it was my car. He walks up, and he's just walking alongside the car, and you can see it. It's waving at you, right? It's just so wavy. And he goes, "What the hell happened here?" And I said, and then he looks at me and goes, "Oh, dude, I'm sorry. Is this your car?" And I went, "Yeah." He goes, "Dude, I'm sorry." And I said, "No,
Whose
man.
piece of junk is this?
You're talking to the first graduate of the Ray Charles School of Bodyworking,
No.
And he really got a kick out of that. And it was
doesn't
horrible.
have to be right. It has to be right now, though.
Yeah, it looked good in the photos, and it looks exactly the same way as it did, that next day. I haven't touched it because
that's the thing. If you get together with all of the bodywork guys, they want it to be perfect.
Yes,
but they don't understand. It's got to be tomorrow.
It's got to be done tomorrow. And that happened more than once where we had to. Especially with bodyworking, that was, I hated the bodyworking stories because you could never get it done on time. And, it was just way too much labor. So I'd much rather build motors.
Oh yeah, no, I'm with you there. And anymore, I'm spoiled. I'd much rather test motors on the engine dyno and not work on them in cars.
Oh boy. Yeah. Yep. That's the only bad part about where I live now. There is not a preponderance of dyno facilities around here.
Yeah.
Carl Customs has a nice 901 dyno that I want to run on, but other than that, there's not a lot of choices.
Yeah, no, it's a whole different thing. I remember putting I put a supercharger on my truck and climbing up into there and doing everything like in the engine bay, and because I'm not tall. And so I had to be in there to make stuff happen. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm gonna be feeling all of this later, even working out and running and stuff. That doesn't prep you for this stuff, Right. I haven't ever used that muscle before, so it's gonna tell me tomorrow.
Oh, it's gonna be talking to you. Yep.
Yeah. No, it's good. Didn't John come out to the Silver State one time? Didn't he come out with that with that Corvette?
That same red 86 Corvette that we went 180 miles an hour with the TRC, he put a cage in it, and we took it to the first. It was the second year of the Pony Express race.
Okay.
And it rained earlier that morning, and so he invited me to come, right? And I was like, "Yeah, I'll come shoot photos." He goes, "No, I want you to ride right seat, be navigator." And it's like, okay. So I got all my safety gear and everything, and that was a 406 small block Chevy that it had a 700 R4 behind it with a gear vendor's overdrive behind that. So he was only going to spin the motor to 5,300, something like that.
Okay.
And he told me later it had titanium valves in it and a 2-to-1 rocker ratio because he knew he couldn't spin it real fast. Because you need
that for 5,500 RPM.
Yeah, he went to all that effort trying to shove as much air through that as he could.
Yeah.
And normally aspirated motor. And we did the calculations, and I forget, like 5,400, somewhere in there was 200 miles an hour. And so we figured, we did all the math on the tire sizes and everything. And so my only job, really, because he knew the course, so he didn't really need me to tell him where to go. So my only job was to start the stopwatch and end it as we went to the finish line. Well, I forgot.
So you had one thing to do.
I had one job.
Yeah, exactly.
And he got mad at me again, and didn't talk to me for like 10 minutes. And so this was back when ESPN2 was just getting started. So they came over to stick a camera in his face. Well, John was not real talkative. And so we're kind of both talking to the interviewer, and you've done Pony Express, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's that hard left-hand turn at the end of the valley straightaway, right?
Yeah.
And that's where everybody crashes. That's where everybody crashes because you get
Yeah.
speed blind. And we went 206 miles an hour. And it's funny because the top of the windows kicked out at about 200 because the pressure.
Yeah, because there's no rail. That's just window and rubber, right?
And so the windows popped out. It got real noisy in there. A bunch of things happened. There was a little wisp of smoke, but then it went away. And about the same time, the light on the gear vendors went out. And John was afraid. I didn't know this, but the wisp of smoke was because those gear vendors have, maybe a couple of pints of ATF in them.
Yeah.
Not a lot. And we're putting so much power through it for a sustained period of time that it cooked it. And the smoke was the trans fluid burning up. And then the clutches locked up. And then that's when the light went out. Well, he was afraid that when we lift, it was just gonna lock everything up and we'd go for a spin. But there was no choice. We had to lift at the end of the straightaway. Yeah. And so there's that left-hand turn coming up. And in my mind, I remembered it as, man, we're going through this way too slow. And I don't know what speed we hit it at, but whatever it was the right speed because he hit the apex, and on the exit, the car went right out to the edge. And I'm looking at nothing but dirt. We're on my side of the car. And then ESPN was interviewing us, and I said, now this is what I was thinking. And John looked at me and says, no, you said that to me. And I did.
So you were thinking that out loud.
I said it out loud, and he goes, and you were wrong. And no shit, I was wrong.
Yeah.
So that was crazy. And then, so at the end of this, we've crossed the finish line. The first thing he looks at me, he goes, what was our time? And I looked at the stopwatch and went, oh.
It was about.
But yeah, so I was a passenger. We went, I think 206, and we didn't win, and he was really disappointed. We were in the unlimited class.
Yeah. And
I don't think this was the second year. Big Red was not there because the first year, Joe Pettit went for a ride with the Big Red car.
Yeah, that's nuts.
And that was crazy because he came back from that, and I said, would you ever do it again? He goes, no, but he did. Then later they went back, was it 10 years ago?
I mean, RJ's a good driver. He was pretty young back then, though.
He was very young back then.
And so a lot of times when you're young, you're a lot braver than you are. Than you should be.
Because Joe Pettit said, I'll never do that again. That was the scariest thing I've ever done in my entire life.
Oh, it's a terrible feeling. I don't like riding in the car on the freeway with people. I mean, I don't.
Right.
It's a different thing.
Well, I have a standing rule. I don't go for rides with people that I'm doing stories with on their cars, especially high horsepower cars.
Good idea.
Because they always want to show you how badass their car is, right?
Yeah.
And twice I've had people try to kill me. And so I just, and I'll get people say, oh, you're afraid I'll scare you. And I go, yeah, I am, and, and what happens is you get the magazine guy in your car, you want to show them everything, right? So you push it a little harder than maybe you would. Yeah. And, twice people have tried to kill me. So I help people with their car, and they say, well, you drive it. I go, no, I'll ride with you. But if you're going to get on it hard, you just take it and come back and tell me what it did, because I'm not going to ride with you.
Yeah. When I was instructing, I had to go through that speech a number of times with people. I'm like, look, you are not going to impress me. Yeah. I said, I've been on the track with guys that can do magic shit with their cars.
Yep.
It doesn't matter what you think you can do. I don't want you trying to do that. No. I can help make you a better driver, but don't try to do dumb stuff. I said, you're not the best driver that I've ever seen. And you're a long ways from doing that. I said, so let's just manage this and keep you on track and keep both of us safe. So we don't have to go through that.
Yeah, driving fast is an art form, and I'm impressed with any driver. So I took Bonrot school back in '88, and I thought I was a hot stuff driver, and quickly learned that I was not. It's just something you have to do every day. You have to do it.
Yeah, no, there are reasons why guys get paid to do that, and they're at a different level.
Yep. I think it's a perishable skill.
Oh, it is. Yeah, yeah. Age, your vision goes away, your reflexes,
Yeah.
your nerve, I think, goes away. I mean, I remember being out at the Silver States and thinking, why would everybody here not be going wide open throttle through all of this race except for the narrows?
Yeah.
Like you
Yeah.
have a car that can go 170, 180, 200, whatever it is. Why are you not doing that all the time?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
after you get older, you're like, oh, that's
That's
why.
why.
Because you realize that when you're 19 or 20 or
Yeah.
whatever,
Did you ever do
a different world?
Yeah. Did you ever do the Virginia City hill climb?
Yeah, many, many times in my Mustang.
Oh yeah. I did that twice. That was a scary deal. And
Yeah.
the second year we went up with my Chevel, I broke both times. One year I lunched the entire electrical system in the car. And the second year I broke the transmission because I didn't check the trans fluid. And then, when you're going uphill, all the trans fluid goes to the tail shaft and burn the transmission up. But yeah,
there's a lot of blue sky stuff over on the edge there,
and no guardrails. Yeah. Boy, yeah. But high risk and low reward.
Yeah, because you get nothing for going fast.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
you get nothing but a pat on the back. No, that was a fun race because I'm young. I have a Mustang and not an F40 Ferrari, but you get to see stuff like that's where I met Amir, who was driving that. He had a Testarossa there at the time, and he's like, I drive this every day. I mean, I think it had 150,000 miles on it when he had it when I met him. He goes, I drive it every day. He goes, this is what you have to do to these cars, and it lasts forever. I'm like, dude,
he did some impressive stuff with that Streamliner, that Cadillac, that turbocharged Cadillac Streamliner. That was the first time out with that car. It went over 400 miles an hour. I don't think he really ever got the credit in the industry for being a real hot rodder,
because those motors were not Duttweiler motors.
No,
Cadillacs that he was doing that with were not that.
Iron head Cadillac motor with a turbo.
Oh yeah. Could you have made like a worse choice? I mean,
exactly. But that he was that unique in that he wanted to do something different. Well, okay, that fits.
he took an F40 out to the salt. I mean, who does that?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, yep. My nothing but love and nothing but salute for guys that are like that. That was a kind of an awesome experience. So where is the Chevel that you have has been in, has had a long history in all the magazines and has been used for all kinds of stuff. But what is it currently? What is the motor and trans combination in that?
I moved to Iowa about 3.5 years ago, and it's here with me. And at the time that I ran it at the Pony Express race, which is like the Silver State, that was with the Lingfelter 420. That motor has been an absolute anvil. We ran it at the Pony Express twice. We drag raced it forever. I did. Remember the Triathlon of Motorsports in Vegas?
We did that,
I did that 3 times with that car, that motor, and just had a lot of fun with it. And I would always run the valves before and after. And after a while, it's like, why am I doing this? Because the lash never changed.
Yeah.
Absolute anvil. I just pulled that motor out of the car about a year ago, and I bought I bought one of the very last ones that you could get, the wet sump LS7 motor that they had for a crate engine.
Okay.
I got it through Scoggin Dickey, and I'm because the big reason both those motors make about the same power. I mean, my motor makes right around 560, I think. But it's it's a bow tie block, so it's heavy. And Chevels, they hang the engine out halfway over the front axle. So there's a lot of front end weight. The best I was able to get it down to was 56% front weight. So I bought this LS7 and going to drop it in there. Basically all we have to do is change the oil pan, and then I'm going to drop it in there and take about 125, 130 pounds off the nose of the car.
Oh, that'll be a lot.
It'll be the same power, and then I'm going to put a TKX behind it. And I think it'll be a fun little car. It turned into mostly a racer. And so I hardly ever drove it on the streets anymore. And but now I'm thinking I'm going to put the heater back in it, because out here it rains and it so you need windshield wipers, you need a defroster, you need these things. So I'm going to put them back in the car, which will add a little weight to the car, but I think it'll still be okay. But it's still it's a pig. It's still, if I can take 100 pounds off it, I think it's race weight with me, and it will still be around 3,500, 3,450, something like that. Okay. It's heavy. But
when was that Lingfelter motor built? What year was that motor?
1993. So
we lasted a long time.
Oh yeah. We never did a story on it because at the time I felt like it didn't fit because it was, now it's a nothing burger, right? People build them all the time. Yeah. But back then nobody was building it was a 4.155 3.875 stroke. So, and now, of course, soon after that, they started putting 4-inch strokers in small block Chevys, and you could build a 434. But at the time, that was pretty exotic. And I thought, the readers aren't going to care about this. So I paid for all the parts, and John built it for me, because we were friends. And and that car, that engine, absolute anvil. All I do is change the oil.
And that was a solid roller cam, right?
It was a very small solid roller. I think it was 228, 230 at 50. It was tiny, really. And so because of that, and we didn't spin it real fast, I told him I wanted a torque monster. So he sends me the dyno sheet. And back then he had a Stuska, and literally probably it was still, remember the old sheets? You pull a motor of one RPM and then write the beam number down, then calculate the torque. He was still doing that. He pulled my motor down to 1,600 wide open throttle. It made like 420 foot-pounds of torque at 1,600. It's a tractor motor, Oh, yeah. And it was all done at about 5,750, 5,800. It was all done. Had a Super Ram on it and an XL DFI. And up until about 5 years ago, it still had that Gen 2 DFI system on it. And I did a story with John Meany. This was probably about 5 years ago now, 5 or 6 years ago, when he came out with the Big Stuff 3, his addition to Big Stuff 2. Yeah. And I went up to his house. I spent a couple of days with him, and we spent about half the time telling me about the new fuel injection system that he was designing, and the other half of the story was just telling Lingfelter stories. And so I told at some point my motor came up, and I said, I still have your DFI system on there. And he looked at me like I just said the world was flat. He goes, and I said, the sad part is, he goes, what? I said, I don't have a computer now that will run the software because it was all best on floppies. That's how old that stuff was. Yeah. So we're about to step into the 21st century here with this LS7, which will be really
at least the 19th. Even that was No, that's really cool. What heads are on that stroker motor?
A Lingfelter motor?
Yeah.
A very early set of Airflow Research 195s.
Okay.
Which for a 4-20-inch motor is kind of small.
Yeah.
So I sent John the heads, and they ported them. So they're probably up around maybe 205. I don't know. There's a lot of room to move in those early castings.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I've never measured it. But I'm thinking of actually taking it apart and just tuning it up with rings and bearings and doing a line-to-line coating on the pistons.
Okay.
And reusing them. And then I've got my buddy Will Hansel wants to go to Bonneville. We're going to use that motor. We're going to put that in Keith Turk's Camaro.
Okay, cool.
The Freiburger hot rod special car, which
that car's setting a lot of records.
Yeah, and then we're going to put a supercharger on it. We're shooting for around 750. I think it will make 555, maybe 575 once we get it all tuned back up. I may change the cam a little bit. It's got a tiny little camshaft in it.
Yeah.
But we want it to be durable because we got 4 guys. There's 2 of Will's friends, Will Hansel, and then myself. And we're all going to try and go out and get licensed. And then Keith says the only way you can use my car is you take it out and set records with it. So we've identified a couple of classes. I don't know what they are off the top of my head, but I'm responsible for the motor. So I got a small little centrifugal that we're going to stick on it, and then just run like 10, 12 pounds of boost. There are intercoolers in the car, which will help, but it's 11-1 compression motor, but we're going to run the boost up because, there's no air up there. Density altitude's probably, I don't know, 6,500, 7,000 feet.
Yeah, it can get high up there, especially when it gets hot.
Kind of like a typical day at the old LACR, right?
Yeah, there you go. I know, and I don't know if guys recognize it, but Will Hansel is the guy that wrote the first LS book.
Absolutely.
Basically, he just told you, look, LS6 everything. That was his deal back then.
Yep.
And I have a copy up here, and it's it's kind of the go-to deal.
I still reference it every once in a while for stuff that I need. Yeah. That was a hassle for him because he's now left GM, but back then he was working for GM, and he had to jump through all kinds of flaming hoops to get GM to approve that project because they all thought that he was doing it on company time. He wasn't, but that was the thought pattern. And there was, there's a lot of politics involved with big corporations.
Oh, it's terrible.
So it was a labor of love. Well, you've done a couple car tech books too, haven't you?
Yeah, 10 of them.
10 of them. Wow. Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, not just car tech.
I can let the secret out now. The HP book that the black cover book that John wrote. The how to hot rod small block Chevys, essentially, with Lingfelter. I actually ghost wrote that book.
That was ghost written, nice.
Yeah, and I finished it, and then they decided that it would be better if it was done first person. So I had to go back through and re-edit the whole thing, written in first person rather than third person.
Okay.
So, and it was funny too because I went to John and I said, "Hey, I want to do this book. Would you be interested in doing it?" And he goes, "Yeah, that'd be great." And he said, "So what's the split?" And I said, "How about 70-30?" And he just looked at me and goes, "No, my name's on the book, 50-50. I said, "I'm doing all the work." And he goes, "Yeah, but it's my name." Nobody will buy a book by Jeff Smith, and it's like, yeah, okay. So
little do they know.
Yeah. And I just ran across something on the internet today. I was looking something completely different, and I found some forum thing I was looking for, and this guy was talking about that book. I have a copy of that. You can see all the books I have up there. That's good stuff. Yep. So that was fun, but I had to really be careful, because Peterson back then, they felt like you were indentured servants, right?
Oh yeah, no, everything belongs to them.
Everything belonged to them. So the key to the whole thing is just to never ask permission. You don't tell them what you're doing, and if they ever figure it out, which they never did.
No, you know that answer is going to be no.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, if you just ask.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, and it's interesting you're talking about that. The 383 Corvette that went 184 or whatever when John drove it. And if you put that into perspective back then, the Callaway twin turbo Corvette, which was about 400 horsepower it was like 385 and then 400, which they kind of did the same thing with the ZR1 also. All of those were like right at about 180 miles an hour. And John's was, more than that. It's kind of a cool deal.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that was fun. That was a fun time. And it was a classic deal that we did it in 2 days. And the first day we took the car to the drag strip down to Muncie Drag, which was just right down the road from his shop. Got back about 6 o'clock, worked on the car with doing a bunch of, he built a custom air dam underneath the front edge of the car, did a bunch of stuff to it. We finished at about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning. Drove the car to a hotel near TRC. By the time we got there, it was 5 o'clock in the morning. We had a 6 a.m. wake up. So we got about an hour of sleep, then jumped back in the car, goes to TRC, runs the times, and then drove back, And that's the kind of crazy stuff that we did. That was not unusual.
I was going to say, if you talk to John and he was racing, that's what he was doing. I mean, because that's what racing's like.
Yep. And then I don't know how many times.
I remember the story that Kazi told when I was at the Engine Masters competition. Again, I'm still sitting around with all of these like legendary guys that know how to build engines. I'm an engine assembler and they're like engine builders. And so I got to sat there and listen to them. And Kazi's like, he goes, I'm at these IHRA races and I probably have 14 of the top 16 guys that are, in the finals or whatever. He goes, I'm sitting over here on the wall wondering what I can do to make my Engine Masters motor make more power. Yeah. I said, yep, that's it. I mean, that's,
Yeah.
got
Yeah.
priorities.
And it would be fun he would probably do it. Talk about how innovative he was on some of those engines for Engine Masters. The Mel engine, the Mercury Lincoln engine with the pucks, where he extended the valve position.
He did like a 312 wide block or something and they used a small block Chevy manifold on it. The one before that, he did the 300,000th head gasket on it. He's done some really cool stuff.
Yep. In the middle of that project, he'd make these pucks. They were about this thick, 2.5 inches thick, because that Mel engine, the Mercury Lincoln engine, the valve, the port was basically a right turn. And he knew that wasn't going to work. So he extended the length of it and put a longer valve in it so he could have a radius into the seat. And so he was so proud of it. One day I just got these pictures on my phone of these pucks, and I'm trying to figure out what the hell this is. And he says, I just had to show somebody, but you can't talk about this. And I go, I'm not even sure what I'm looking at, And then later he showed me the cylinder heads and the head gasket and everything else. It's like, okay. And that blew everybody away.
His AETC conference, because I was helping Harold. I was a moderator or whatever, or a MC guy, whatever, and he showed the video of the finger pulsating stuff. I'm like, oh my God, that is the greatest thing in the world. I would love to have him on and show that video while it's doing. And when you hear him talk about that, he's like a little kid. He's like, oh my God, this is the most awesome thing. We really need to be able to shield and not stand next to this motor while we're running at wide open throttle, because bad things could happen. But look what's going on with my finger.
He wore a rubber glove the first time, and it ripped it off his finger.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It went through the motor. Oh, it was hysterical. He called me a couple months before the AETC conference and says, you got to come to conference this year. And I said, yeah, I'm coming. He goes, okay, good. He goes, I'm going to do a presentation. I said, cool. What's it about? He goes, I'm not going to tell you. And I go, okay, all right, cool. And it was so funny, but at the same time, really educational, because and you don't understand how severe the pulses are.
Yeah.
And I remember people don't
have an idea. Yeah, they have no idea that is going on, because most guys think, like, especially if you talk to a head porter or whatever, they're like, no, I got to port the head and I got to port match. I said, do you have any idea what's going on in there? You don't know the chaos that's happening in there.
It's a tornado times 10.
Oh, yeah.
It's unbelievable what's going on.
Yeah.
And, pulses traveling up and down the port. All this stuff is going on.
Multiple ones canceling each other out. Craziness. Yeah.
There are times when there's air going in and going out at the same time.
And we saw a cool thing, because I think it was McDonald when they were testing at Wastegate, because they were trying to run like a nitrous motor to go 300 or whatever in their production body car.
Yeah.
And so he brought a like it was a clear intake manifold, basically. But it wasn't. It's not an intake, but it was the lid basically for it.
Okay.
And so you could watch what was going on.
Yeah.
And they wanted to see what was happening when they were running like a lot of nitrous on this.
Yeah.
Thing. And so they're hitting with a whole bunch of different kits, and you could see it was chaos inside there. You're like, oh my God, how does that even work? How does stuff even
liquid fuel's going everywhere. Yeah.
Oh yeah, coming in and going out and going across and skipping over, and you're like,
and then you start to get an appreciation for why you get for a carbureted engine, even fuel injected engines, you get huge variations in air fuel ratios. Yeah. And it's like, well, that's just pure chaos going on inside there. The fact that it runs at all is just astonishing.
Yeah,
a story, a podcast that we could probably do that would be really fun was I did a story on the original. When we talk about chaos, the original Wright brothers first engine, the A.
Oh
engine. Yeah, it had a camshaft only on the exhaust side. It had no spark plugs. And it had no
Was it
carburetor.
diesel compression engine?
No. I'll tell you, because I looked it up. I was
Okay.
reading this book about the Wright brothers, and there was one sentence that said the engine didn't have any spark plugs. Like, well, how do you do that? It's not direct injected or anything back in 1903.
Yeah.
What they did was, it was you know what a T-head engine is?
I don't think I've ever seen one.
Okay, a T-head is the cylinder is vertical, and the two valves are at opposite ends.
Okay.
And then the combustion chamber's in the center. And what they did was they had enough room in there. There's only like a 5-to-1 compression ratio, something like that. That Charlie Taylor, the guy that worked for them at the bicycle repair shop, built the engine, designed and built the engine. And what he used was a pair of contact points inside the T-head, and that was
that was the spark for it.
That was the spark.
Oh, that's
and
so
it had
cool.
no carburetor. All it was a hole, about a 5-inch hole in this flat pan that was a box, and they would drip fuel into this pan, and then the fuel would vaporize, and then the intake valve would suck it in. And there was no no lobe for the intake valve, because what they use is a really soft spring. When the piston pulled down, it would pull the valve open.
Oh, nice.
It should never have run. It should have never worked. And
then they attached that to a plane that most people can't fly.
Yeah.
Even now.
Yeah.
That I mean, they flew it, but I remember when they did the recreations of the first 3 planes that flew, basically. So there was a Wright brothers plane, and then there's one in France, I think.
Maybe
one in Germany or somewhere.
Yeah.
And the other 2 worked very well and behaved like planes are supposed to. And then the people that flew the Wright brothers plane are like, oh my God, how did they even make this work? This is terrible.
This thing is evil.
Yeah. We can't fly this.
Yeah. Yep.
No, that's very cool.
It's just astonishing. I mean, you go back and look at history, and you start looking at old engines and stuff like that, and you think, oh my God, how did this even work? The exhaust valve they made out of steel that they used sewer lids.
Oh, okay.
Steel for sewer lids, and they cut it out, and they machined it, and then I don't know how they attached the stem to it. They probably friction welded or something. I don't know.
That's crazy, because they had
they built the entire
that they used,
and it was an aluminum block engine, because the spec was it couldn't weigh more than, I forget what the number was, but it was super light. So they worked with a company called the Aluminum Company of America, which turned out to be Alcoa.
Oh, nice.
And they cast the block. The cylinders screwed into the crankcase. Yeah, crazy.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So, well, I guess we just did a podcast on it. So,
yeah, kind of. Yeah, that's really cool stuff.
Look into the details. I did a story that's on Holley's website, their Motor Life website. I did a story on that a couple of years ago. It's an amazing engine. It should never have worked, but it did.
Hello, did you guys get them? Did you guys get them? What was that? Well, that's very cool. So we got a lot more things that we can talk about. You guys let me know in the comments, and we'll stay for another minute or so. We got to get going. But Jeff was also instrumental. I think you did the first test that I saw of the compressed air supercharger system.
Oh yeah, with Carl
Stagemeyer. This was long ago. I mean, it had to be 5 or 6 years ago, right?
Yes.
Okay, so let me know in the comments, do you guys want to hear, information about that testing? Because obviously it's happening now in drag racing, and guys are doing it. Tina Pierce, I think, is doing stuff with it, and some others, and it's really, really cool. And so it would be
fun to get Carl Stagemeyer on with us, because there's the technology involved with that thing was not easy. And
Carl is a great guy. He used to was instrumental in all the stuff in NOS back in the day. Yep. And he's just good people.
Yep.
Okay, so we will set that up, and I will get a hold of Carl, and we'll try to make that happen as soon as possible. Jeff, thanks a lot for coming on, man. That was awesome.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, the Callaway stuff is awesome, and then we will talk hopefully and get together with Carl. I think that will be fantastic.
Yeah, that would be fun.
Thanks, guys. I will see you guys all later.
All right. See you.
and we're ending our stream.